Welcome back on Game Plan 2017. Tonight, 58 days and counting to the deadline within which IEBC shall conduct a fresh presidential election as ordered by the Supreme Court. But the next battlefront among the protagonists is whether or not IEBC, as currently constituted, should preside over the election. President Kenyatta and the Jubilee Party insist IEBC should oversee the process, while NASA, led by Raila Odinga, insists there must be changes and even criminal prosecutions against officials at the Commission. So which way forward? Keep talking to us. The hashtag is GamePlan2017 on Twitter. You can text us on 22422. In studio now, Senators Kipchumba Murkomen and of Elgeyo Marakwet County, and also Senator Homa Bay County Moses Kajua. I must say Kipchumba Murkomen for the first time is joining us now, also as Majority Leader in the Senate, and congratulations for that post.
Thank you.
Honorable Murkomen.
Thank you.
Very quickly, I'll start with you, but before that, let's take a look at the sound bites today. This is what, of course, first President Kenyatta and Ruto said, and what Raila Odinga said and even reiterated today in Mathare. If you can take a look.
Let IEBC do their job. Let them declare the date. And Raila, let us meet at the ballot. Sini namna hiyo? We are not bothered with courts anymore. Court wamemaliza kazi yao. Wamesema turudie. Si namna hiyo? Na wamesema IEBC within 60 days. Bas. Tuwagojea debe. Na tuwataka siku itangazwe haraka. Haraka. Yeah. Kama hawa watu wanataka UN, waende wafanye UN wawe agency wao. Wafanye yote, sisi hatujali. Wakitaka kuita nani, maserikali ya wazungu hao, wakitaka kuita hiyo, wakuje wa supervise. Wakuje wakue, wanaitwa nini? Monitors, wanaitwa observers. Lakini kura ifanywe na tume ambaye iko katika katiba la Kenya, na hiyo ni IEBC. Waita hawa wazungu wote wakuje watembee huko, watembee na hawa. We don't care. We have nothing to hide.
Hawawezi kutuzungusha tena. IEBC hii ndiyo itasimamia uchaguzi inayokuja.
Wanapewa kifua tena. Uchaguzi unafanywa ndani ya siku 40, na hiyo IEBC hiyo. Mwambie hiyo ni ndoto.
We have a problem with our judiciary, but regardless, we respect, but we shall revisit.
Right, those were the sentiments about IEBC. You as NASA first say IEBC cannot conduct the fresh election as currently constituted. What changes would NASA want to see in IEBC? Specific changes.
Thank you, Hussein. Hussein, just allow me to convey my condolences and sympathies to the families of the people, of the girls who lost their lives at Moi Girls, because as we politic, life goes on. Back to politics. The Supreme Court said that there were irregularities and illegalities committed by IEBC. If someone commits an illegality, we expect that the Supreme Court is going to push that matter further to the DPP for prosecution. If someone commits an irregularity, there is the IEBC Act, and there is a code of conduct, and there is the IEBC staff manual that gives certain guidelines on recourse that can be taken when a member of IEBC commits an irregularity. Now, the argument we are pushing forth is this. If particular persons within IEBC are confirmed to have committed irregularities and illegalities, can they be the same people to drive the exercise? And our answer is no. We are alive to the fact that we've got a constitutional duration within which the next elections must be undertaken. We are not saying that we throw away the entire commission and put in place a new commission. That's far from it. I think it's a matter of interpretation. But the persons who shall have been identified by the court,
by
the Supreme Court, who have committed irregularities and illegalities, there are procedures for their removal. Now, you say, imagine, what if the Supreme Court says that the chairman of the IEBC, in their opinion, committed an illegality and recommends that the DPP pursues the matter? Do you go into elections with someone who has been fingered in such a manner? And therefore we are saying, as we wait for the Supreme Court to deliver its full and reasoned verdict, We will study it. We will look out for the persons we think could have subverted the will of the people through certain actions, and
NASA,
then we will insist those will not be part of the next
leadership
election.
and MPs has talked about specific people already.
Yes,
you've talked about Chiloba, the CEO. You've talked about one commissioner, Professor Gulia. You've talked about Immaculate Kasait. You've talked about James Muhati and other individuals within IEBC. And from today in Mathare, you actually said Chebukati has no blame. On what basis are you saying this? That some should be out, some should be in. Why would you say that?
Remember, the decision that the Supreme Court is making was based on the evidence that we presented in court. We were the petitioners. It is also based on the responses that came from the first, second, and third respondent. Already, from the proceedings of the court, there are certain actions or certain acts, errors of omission and commission that we highlighted or demonstrated to the court. And this can be attributed or traced to certain parties. When it comes to issues of data verification, or verification of Forms 34A and 34B and 34C, there are certain officials of IEBC who are responsible for that. We want to look at the reasoned argument and reasoned verdict of the court to confirm whether
who exactly is responsible.
Yes,
so
but already we can focus.
Saying this prior to that is not right then?
Already
that some of the names you're saying this prior to the judgment, the full judgment is not right.
One of the areas that the Supreme Court was very particular on was on transmission. And transmission borders on technology. Transmission also borders on the responsibility of the presiding officers or returning officers who are deployed countrywide. But our firm and final position on this matter will be confirmed once we get the reasoned argument of the Supreme Court. But anyone who committed irregularities and illegalities cannot be part of the next election.
Right.
Thank you, Hussein. First of all, I want to join my colleague, Senator Kajwang, to convey my condolences and sympathies to the families that lost their loved ones in the Moi girls incident, and pray that this thing comes to an end. And unfortunately, you know, it's affecting many other schools. We continue praying and pass our sympathies. Number two is to say, Hussein, I am here today a very sad person, very concerned about this country. I have never been angrier in my life than when the decision was made on Friday. A decision that lacks in merit, it lacks in details, there is no information as to exactly why you nullify a decision of 15 million Kenyans, over 15 million Kenyans. Now we are being told by Senator Kajwang here that they are privy to the judgment. They even know who is at fault. To the best of my knowledge, and having read the statement read by Justice Maraga, he just said that there were problems in transmission. That problem is not even attributed to any individual person. Which begs the question, is it possible that NASA is assisting in writing the judgment? Is it possible that they are privy now to the people they want to include in that judgment so that they can hang them dry? I have a big problem saying, and I think, let me start by saying that there is a lot of contradiction in this argument about IEBC. First of all, you have a decision that we have a problem with the decision, because the decision just says we have found out that there was a problem in transmission of results, not in the voting, not in the counting, not in the tallying, in the transmission of the results, and as a result, we are nullifying the elections, and we will give a judgment within 21 days. On a serious, there has never been, and I want any lawyer, any serious lawyer, there's never been such similar judgment that overturns the will of the people with that kind of in a very casual manner.
But we haven't
in
seen
a very cavalier
But as
manner.
you say, we have not seen the full judgment.
That's what I'm saying. When you are overturning a decision of over 15 million people, there has to be at least a basis of that decision. We are just being told there's a problem in transmission, we'll give you judgment 21 days in a very casual and cavalier
So what was
manner.
the difference on what was the difference in 2013? Because you supported that decision in 2013,
was
and the full judgment came way after.
2013 was not about overturning. If this decision was in affirming the decision of the people, we would not have a problem with it. But when you are going against a decision that has already been made by an independent institution called the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission, gone through processes of all agents of different political parties making a decision, and you can't just sit there, 7 people, and make an overturn without giving proper explanation. Be that as it may, and as we've said, we will obey the decision, although we don't agree. IEBC is an independent institution. IEBC is a constitutional body. There are mechanisms for dealing with IEBC. We are the players. NASA is a player, Jubilee is a player. When did that...
And others as well.
Yeah, and the other players. And the question I'm just asking myself, which part of independence does NASA not understand? We criticize a decision after it has been rendered by the Supreme Court. They tell us you must not criticize the judge. And in the same side, one part of the mouth says don't criticize Supreme Court. On the other side, it's dictating who should be sacked from IEBC. I mean, honestly, should we be able to believe in such people? Number two, what is this obsession with individuals within IEBC? What information, who are these people working with to eliminate certain staff of IEBC, certain commissioners of IEBC? In our scheme of things, in what we understand to be, and we have said it several times, even before the August 8 elections, is that NASA is not prepared for elections. NASA does not want to win elections. They know they can't win.
Okay.
What they want is to precipitate a situation of crisis so that then we can say, we want an international community, let's sit down and share government and the so-called Nusumkate, and as we've said, that will not happen, not even a flag.
I'll let him respond to that, but just before that, the Supreme Court decision is definitely, depending on the level, we'll know that later, but it's definitely an indictment on IEBC, because it talks about irregularities and illegalities. Are you saying, Honorable Murkomen, that regardless of what has happened, an election, presidential election has been overturned, we should go into an election with IEBC the way it is?
You see,
despite the Supreme Court finding illegalities.
You see, Hussein, first, that Supreme Court has no power. It has absolutely no power of investigation and of being able to attribute to any person any possibility of committing a criminal act. So that responsibility must be taken back to investigatory and then, charge a person and so forth.
So would you want that to happen?
So to start, I have no problem. Once we find that there is a person to be charged and so forth, there is no problem. But
so there should be investigations, because that's what they are calling for. IEBC cannot go, we can't go to the election with the IEBC the way it is.
And that's why I'm telling you this. No, let's just come to this. Even today as we speak, even judges of High Court, even judges of Supreme Court, even senators, even governors, even ministers can be investigated as they are doing their job. There is nothing that stops any institution, independent or otherwise, for being investigated. Even there's an individual inside there that is doing. Okay. You cannot start walking to a place and say, in this whole commission cannot do this job. You know very well that they have only 60 days to, now 57 or so days to deliver, and you want to stop that delivery because in any case, you are not prepared for the elections.
Hussein, if you listen to my colleague, Senator Murkomen, carefully, you'll realize we are saying the same things. Perhaps it is our political affiliation that is discoloring what comes out. Because Murkomen agrees with me that if the irregularities and illegalities committed by officials of IEBC, then due process should be followed. We might disagree on what that due process is. In my view, is that once the Supreme Court fingers or identifies certain persons within IEBC to have committed illegalities and irregularities, even if you send it back to the DPP for pursuit, even if you send it back to the HR department of IEBC for action, those persons should recluse themselves from the next elections. You cannot have them being at the center of the next general election. I want to confirm to Murkomen that we are very ready for elections in the next 57 days. If we were not ready, we would not have gone to the Supreme Court. Because we knew going to the Supreme Court, one of the likely outcomes was going back for fresh elections, which is what has come out of this. But one message that needs to go out to the nation, that this ruling is a landmark. And in the words of Kwame Nkrumah, 60 years ago in 1957, when Ghana was gaining independence, he said, there is a new African in the world. And today I can say there's a new African in the world, one that shows fidelity to its constitution, one that respects the rule of law, and one that fears God. What Kenya has done in this judgment has given a demonstration and an indication that if we were to follow the constitution, respect the rule of law, and fear God, it will not matter who's the president of this country. It might as well be Murkomen. But we know that if he's guided by those three things, then Kenyans will be subject to justice and prosperity.
Okay.
I think that's a remarkable step that despite all our quarrels, we must acknowledge that there's a new African.
If it's about the rule of law, are you ready then to follow the laid down procedures if it's the removal of a commissioner or any other officials of IEBC? Because we've been hearing NASA talking about it publicly, but no formal process launched.
Definitely, Hussein, we are very much alive to Article 250, 251 of the Constitution on removal of IEBC commissioners. And my brother Murkomen on the Jubilee side, I know he's aware, because he's a lawyer of no mean repute and is a very accomplished senator. I know he's aware of the procedure of removal of judges of the Supreme Court. Parliament has no role. Politicians have no role. It is initiated by the Judicial Service Commission and goes to the President. Our role as Parliament is very, very fringe. I want to ask them also to avoid a situation where we are making certain institutions look like they belong to certain political groupings. What is coming out, they are creating the impression that the Supreme Court belongs to NASA and IEBC belongs to Jubilee. If you look at the strident defense that the President and his deputy and his foot soldiers have been putting on behalf of IEBC, you get the impression that IEBC is a department under Jubilee. We feel flattered, of course, to be associated with the Supreme Court, because that is a citadel of justice in this nation. But the Supreme Court, the judiciary, is an independent institution. We must be alive to the processes in the Constitution for their dissolution. Murkomen said the other day that if we go after IEBC, he will go after Supreme Court. I think that was the wrong direction.
No, I think...
Yeah, I mean, that's a question I was going to ask anyway. Yeah. Why would you peg the removal of IEBC commissioners or equate it to the removal of Supreme Court judges?
First of all, let me say this. As I said, the judgment of the IEBC by the Supreme Court by the majority will go down in history as the worst judgment this country has ever witnessed. And this is not the first judgment where Justice Maraga was involved. And in the fullness of time, as the President said, when we revisit this matter as a postmortem to find out what exactly happened, many Kenyans will appreciate that.
Okay. I'll have to, I'm sorry to cut you short, but what do you mean when you say you'll revisit this matter?
Definitely, we must.
Because you've seen so many quarters, Judges and Magistrates Association, LSK, so many bodies now saying the Jubilee leadership is trying to intimidate Maraga and his team.
As I told you, this is a country of immense contradictions. I have criticized the LSK in my posts on social media and in public. I have criticized the judiciary. And I'm enjoying my constitutional rights to be able to criticize how decisions are made. For example, if we want to revisit this matter, should we allow 4 judges out of 7 to just make a decision and overturn a decision that Kenyan people want? In future, might we need a reform to say that for a Supreme Court to overturn a decision that has been made by the people of Kenya, you may need supermajority, for example, or you may need unanimous decision of the whole Supreme Court, and so forth. There are certain things that we have to revisit. We have also to revisit as to how it happened in a country like ours that you have a situation where a voter is not being faulted for voting, the counting of the votes in a polling station is being faulted, the counting in the constituency, which was declared by the courts to be final, is not being faulted, and now you say the transmission mechanism, because there was no network somewhere, because the form arrived in which form, that you nullify elections on that very trivial technicalities, and on the same note you are saying technicalities must not override substantive justice. These are things that scholars out there will have to revisit in journal articles. These are things that politicians in Parliament and other places must discuss in terms of election reform. These are things that politicians like the President must be able to think through and say that, is it possible that when you have 2 or 3 people, it's easy for them to be compromised and therefore affect delivery of justice. So the question of we will revisit this matter is obvious.
Then my question would be, in 2013, the Supreme Court decision, I believe then was also 4-2.
No, I mean the Supreme Court. It was unanimous. It was unanimous. So
why then? Why then after that? Why then after that didn't you say 6 people, because it was
6
people cannot decide the will of the people.
Because they never decided the will of the people.
But either way, they had to decide one way or the other.
In 2013, you know, Hussein, when you go with an election petition, you are overturning a decision that has been made. And when you are overturning a decision that has been made, the threshold must be so high in terms of adducing evidence. In this regard, I was in court, and you know, we were following all these procedures when our lawyers were making the case in court, and where the lawyers of the petitioners and the other respondents. By the way, I see some people discussing out there that, oh, Jubilee lawyers lost. We never lost anything. I mean, in the first place, the decision was that our party, our president and the party, as you had the decision, was that, you know, we were not involved in any way in the transmission problems. So there is nothing you can say that our lawyers lost or so forth. And I don't think, in my personal judgment, I don't think there's anything IEBC lawyers lost. But be that as it may, this is the way forward for me, is that we can discuss a postmortem of what happened in the courts. I saw newspapers giving various accounts of these stories. I have had certain judges who don't prefer so-and-so, who have a grudge with so-and-so and so forth. Those are things we can revisit later. What's important for me, number one, is to appreciate Jubilee supporters and tell them, we were chatting with Moses. You know, Moses is one of my very good friends on the other side. And I was telling him when we were coming here, I hope at least my colleagues and supporters of NASA will learn something from supporters of Jubilee. That despite the fact that we are feeling strongly that we have been deprived of justice, we have conducted ourselves in a very honorable manner. No tires were burned, no people went to the street, no looting what was done. And I think one of the first reactions I put on my social media was to tell people, this is our country, it doesn't matter how the decision goes, these fights will be done using institutional mechanisms, and we don't want a situation where people will fight. And I hope in future, people will conduct themselves the way Jubilee supporters conducted themselves. But two and most important is that I hope some people, including LSK, including judges and magistrates, I see my colleagues, we studied together, will not start having this backward mentality that once you have made a decision, we cannot criticize. What I stand for is that you cannot be allowed to intimidate a court. And Hussein, if I can mention this,
and that's what you're actually being accused of doing.
No, let me just say, you cannot be allowed to intimidate a court before rendering a decision. You are allowed to criticize for the decision they have made. And that's why we felt as though our NASA colleagues were actually intimidating the court. And I feel like at least when Raila told them, you must redeem yourself,
and we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to talk about that.
And so forth. Yeah. I really feel that, you know, they crossed the line. We were so restrained that we waited for the judgment before we could criticize the Supreme Court.
But at some point, they actually said this, NASA, that since you talked about Justice George Odunga, there's been problems in the courts. Because then you are also criticized of intimidating the courts. And this has been on both sides, actually, as well as NASA, because now you're saying they are criticizing and intimidating the courts, but we've seen this on both sides. And we're going to look at clips here. Raila, for example, Odinga in Mombasa on the 22nd of August, during the swearing-in ceremony of Governor Joho. Let's take a look.
The Supreme Court is made up of 7 judges. The discretion of 7 individuals, however wise, can neither represent nor substitute the voice of 15 million people. 7 individuals can be intimidated, they can be compromised, and they can make genuine mistakes. Kenyans are still trying to understand what exactly happened in the Supreme Court of 2013, when the decision about their votes was delivered in minutes and a paragraph. Institutionalizing the determination of elections by courts is a deliberate, cynical ploy to lend a cloak of legal respectability to fraud, subversion of democracy, and abuse of the court process.
Senator Kajwang, this is more or less the same thing Murkomen and his team have been saying. Raila Odinga then said, 7 people cannot really determine the will of 15 million people.
And it goes
this was
further.
Days before.
It goes further and says that institutionalizing the resolution of political contest by low costs is not really the way forward. I agree with Murkomen in one respect, that we need to relook the laws relating to elections in this country. We've had one of the longest campaign periods, I think, in Kenya's history, and we are going in for another 60 days. We've had one of the most, perilous elections in terms of legislation. Murkomen was part of the Windsor group that came up with the reforms or recommendations to reform the election laws. We've had change of commissioners within a very short duration. We've had technology deployed just a few days or a few weeks to elections. If there's something we need to revisit, it is not Justice Maraga and the Supreme Court and the 7 ladies and gentlemen. We need to look at the entire electoral landscape so that we don't have a situation where when we go into elections, everything stops. So that we don't have a situation where every election must end at the Supreme Court. And that is what Raila Odinga was saying. Because at the end of the day, once people have voted and it goes to the Supreme Court, you have 7 people. They've got a constitutional mandate. You cannot fault them for making a decision. But you'd rather have a situation where the Electoral Commission gets it right, follows the Constitution, follows the law, so that you've got an outcome that is acceptable to Kenyans and adjudication is not left to the courts of law.
Okay, but seemingly both sides, when the courts don't favor them, seem to be criticizing and to some extent also intimidating the courts, and we've seen that. And we've seen in also other clips when NASA, for example, was, we saw what President Kenyatta said yesterday, what Murkomen even said, what NASA also said during the decision as to whether, when the decision was made up by the appeals court, that the final decision should be at the constituency level. You said you will not accept any other ruling before that happened. Either way, there's another question here. I have to read it very quickly. This is from Ambrose in Nakuru County. Says Kajwang was elected in an election conducted by the same IEBC. And I remember Raila Odinga actually at some point said it is not only the presidential election, but all the other 5 elective seats that had problems. Why hasn't Kajwang, for example, resigned and called for fresh elections even for senators?
The Supreme Court has jurisdiction on presidential elections. And so what was under scrutiny was a presidential election. Forms 34A, B, and C relate to the presidential election. Our forms, I think, were forms 35. The window for petitions on these other petitions opens from tomorrow. So we expect a lot of appeals or a lot of petitions.
So without appeals, there's no problem. You'll go on as it is.
Definitely. If we wouldn't have gone to the Supreme Court, then President Uhuru Kenyatta would already have been sworn in, and Murkomen would now be the official leader of majority.
Okay. Finally, for both of you, we have now about 58 days. The judge's ruling, interestingly, will come out after 21 days, already eating into these 60 days that we have. Do you see time as a problem within IEBC and the changes that have or may not have to be effected? But if changes have to be effected, do you see time being a problem?
First of all, I see a crisis. You're telling IEBC that you go back to elections to correct things that you haven't told them what they are. And so if the judgment takes 21 days, as they say, what are those things that you want the IEBC to correct? They are not in specific nature, they are just talking about transmission. Number 2, I have a problem with the argument of the court insofar as who is the final. There are 2 judgments now that are hanging. One that has not been appealed that says that the results at the polling station are final. And you have another one that says the results at the polling station are not final. The transmission are final. I mean, even if you don't go to any law school, as a matter of fact, the voter is being deprived. And I can tell you, say, you have 40,000 staff called returning you have staff in every of the 40,000 polling stations, about 5 to 6 staff, which means you have about 250,000 people working on elections in polling stations across the country. Then in the constituency, you have about 300,000 people. I can't guarantee you that there will be no errors in any elections, and no country on earth will guarantee you that there will be no someone who will mark something wrongly or who will forget to stamp something, or I can't guarantee you that there will be 3G or 4G everywhere in the country for the transmission to flow as it is. And the question that I ask myself is that judges now saying that we are going to deprive Kenyans of Article 38 constitutional right to vote the leaders they want, Are they going to subvert the provision of Article 1 of the Constitution, which is the sovereign power of the people, on an account of technicalities? I mean, that is really the question I'm asking myself. Where is the guarantee that we will go to these elections, even if you bring commissioners from heaven to come and preside over it? Where is the guarantee that after that, we will not go back to the same Supreme Court to be told again, through technicalities, we can't swear in the president? This circle, how will it go on for how many years as a country? And I think every Kenyan must be mad enough to remember that we cannot just waste about 20 billion of Kenyan shillings on an account of dealing with small technicalities all the time.
Hussein, time is definitely a problem, and part of the failing to the nation is the parliament, the 11th parliament. The judiciary made proposals that we expand the number of days for these presidential petitions from 14 to 30 days. Yeah. And it was a Justice and Legal Affairs Committee of the National Assembly, chaired by one Chep Konga and dominated by Jubilee, that shot it down. So we could have done better. The Constitution also gives Parliament a mandate in coming up with legislation to guide petitions. Keep, you'll need to confirm whether we have done that. I think that is something we haven't done. The Constitution is like a house. There are certain rooms in your house that you rarely visit. And we have gone into a room that we have never visited before. And a situation where we have to repeat an election. And there are a lot of questions that will keep coming up. I believe that in the 12th Parliament, we've got a responsibility to clarify many of these things. But for me, my conviction is this. Irrespective of the outcome of the elections in the next 58 days or 57 days, of course, or less. Of course, as a Nazarite, I believe we shall win the same way we won on 8th of August. But there's one thing we have affirmed as a nation: the supremacy of process over outcome. This country has been one that has been obsessed with outcome. Someone is rich overnight. You don't care how he became rich. Someone is great overnight. You don't care the process through which he went to get rich. What the Supreme Court has brought us back to is that we must look at process as being extremely important as the outcome. If you're going to be rich and you cannot demonstrate the process, then it is a nullity. If you're going to win and it is through a flawed process, then it is a nullity. I think that's a very significant paradigm shift in our thinking as a nation.
Right, thank you so much. Interesting, very, very briefly, as you want to.
Yeah, I think we're saying, even when we talk about processes over substance, I think it is unfortunate to glorify form over substance. The substance that we must ask ourselves, that grandmother who was assisted to vote, he has voted. That somebody never stamped a ballot paper or a form. Honestly, it would be an injustice of the highest magnitude for one to do so. Number two, if in future we are going to behave like this, what you just need to do is to frustrate in about 10 polling stations in a place in Lamu or in Elgeyo Marakwet, where I come from, and then you come to the Supreme Court, produce the 10 polling stations, nullify our non-elections, and cost the country because we are focusing on trivialities over the most important issue of justice. But finally, I just want to say this, that as a country, we must be ready to robustly criticize any decisions that come before us, but we must always remember that no single life is worth being lost for purpose of anybody to ascend to any position of power.
All right, Senators Kipchumba Murkomen and Moses Kajwang, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Tonight, keep talking to us. The hashtag is GamePlan2017 on Twitter. You can text us to 22422. We're back after this break.